This is Hemant Mehta for the Friendly Atheist podcast. I am solo today. Jessica will be back next week. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/friendlyatheistpodcast. Andrew Seidel is Vice President of Strategic Communications for Americans United for Separation of Church and State and the author of The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. He's written and spoken extensively about these issues in a variety of online and print publications and on several news shows. On a personal note, he is someone I routinely look to for guidance on where our shared dystopia is heading because he doesn't hold back on telling the truth, he doesn't mince words, and unlike a lot of legal pundits on cable news shows, he has the distinction of being right all the damn time when he tells us how extreme this current court is. His latest book, out this month, is called American Crusade: How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. Andrew, thank you for joining me. Your new book really summarizes a lot of the big religious cases in front of the Supreme Court over the past few years when it comes to church-state separation. It explains what they were about and what the court did in plain English, and it analyzes what all of that means. I was actually stunned to see that, despite the length of the book and the substance inside of it, and I know you know what I'm going to ask here, you didn't even touch on what the court did in its most recent term because books have deadlines, and I know you have an online supplement to the book, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. But I do wonder, maybe that's unnecessary because your point in the book is to show how the court has weaponized religion, and that has been clear long before this most recent term. So I guess my first question is, after you turned in the draft of this book, how often did you shake your fist at the sky and think no, I need it back, there's more to say?
I mean, it wasn't even just watching the court do so much damage. It was like every week we were getting new revelations about the crusade and the crusaders and this push to weaponize religious freedom. But, I knew these cases were coming, right? And if you read the text, even it was finalized in May, even though we knew this was all going to happen, and it was very predictable. And then that's because there is this really well-funded, powerful network of Christian nationalist organizations and judges that are working to weaponize the First Amendment, right? They're working to turn the protection of religious freedom that is enjoyed by all of us into a weapon of Christian privilege for the few. And, this is a crusade that has been remorselessly waged for about a decade, even though the groundwork was laid before that. So none of what I saw this term from the court was a surprise. And it all falls right into line with this crusade to weaponize religious freedom.
So if the court continues at the pace and the way they've gone about handling these cases, what are the biggest church-state separation barriers that you think are going to fall in the near future? What are the big, not just the big cases, but the big ideas that you're worried we're about to lose?
I mean, one of the big things that I'm really worried about is our public schools. I mean, there's an all-out assault on our public schools right now. And, I guess maybe people don't realize that a lot of the crusade is the religious freedom cases that the crusaders are bringing, right? They're superficially about Christian crosses and veterans, or about playgrounds, or about private school vouchers, or bakeries and gay weddings. But
they don't seem like religious cases.
They don't. And they're not really about religious freedom or any of those other things. What they're really about is religious privilege, often literally privileging religion over non-religion, Christianity over other religions, and to be explicit about it, the right kind of conservative Christian over every other Christian, right? For them, religious freedom is their weapon to reclaim and entrench their lost or waning status as the dominant caste in America. And that really is the goal of every one of the cases that they are trying to bring, to use religious freedom to elevate conservative Christianity above the law, to exempt conservative Christians from the law while disfavoring non-religious and non-Christian citizens who are then required to follow the law. So what they're looking for is a weapon to codify their privilege and supremacy.
And is it just the makeup of the Supreme Court that gives them the ability to weaponize it like this? Because, I mean, the lower courts, the appellate courts, they've also been stacked by right-wing judges for a long time, but it seems like things are happening faster and at a larger level, like bigger cases, more influential cases than ever before. Is that simply the result of Amy Coney Barrett getting on the court?
It's a good question, and that really is a big part of it. I mean, this was going to happen anyway. The crusade was already in the works. What happened with Amy Coney Barrett taking the place of Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the speed of change. Basically, the brakes are gone and off now. Because before she was on the court, John Roberts, a very deeply conservative man, an ideologue, and very much a crusader in favor of weaponizing religious freedom, as the book shows.
Hardly a moderate.
I mean, by no stretch of the imagination is he a moderate or is he a friend to liberals. But he understood that the legitimacy of the Supreme Court depended on slow incremental change. So he wanted all of the same conservative change that we're seeing happen now. He just wanted to do it more slowly to preserve those victories for the future. Because right now we are seeing a massive backlash against the court. Because again, this is a court that is drunk on power. The gloves are off, the brakes are off. There is no restraint whatsoever. And they are seeing blowback as a result of that. And what Roberts wanted to do was the same exact thing, just more slowly, to preserve those victories. So he would have given the same weapon of religious freedom. In fact, that was one of the places he was changing things more quickly than some other areas. He would have given that trump card, that silver bullet, that golden ticket, choose whatever metaphor you want, that would have allowed religious freedom to trump everybody else's rights and other people's rights. He just wanted to do it like a little bit more slowly to preserve those victories into the future. So Amy Coney Barrett being put on the court does make a huge difference. And the lower courts are, of course, crucially important, but really, when it comes to the First Amendment and what that means, the buck kind of stops with the Supreme Court.
You talk a lot in the book about the Federalist Society and their influence on the courts. For the people who are not familiar with this group, can you tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do? And one question I have about them is, ostensibly, that is not a religious organization, and yet it's that group that seems to be responsible for all this religious change we're seeing. So, why is that kind of the primary focus of so much of what they seem to be doing?
Well, I'll answer that second part first. And I think the second part is because religious freedom really can be that silver bullet, right? Because it is a right enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. If you can pervert its meaning, if you can weaponize that protection, right? If you can turn what was this shield into a sword, is the metaphor that we like to use, then you really can cut across so many of the other rules and laws and norms that exist. That's why they were targeting the First Amendment. Now, the Federalist Society itself is a conservative group of lawyers. It started with a group of law students that got together and really sought political and then eventually and really judicial power. And the reason that they targeted religion in the end, especially with their judicial nominees, is because of Leonard Leo. And Leonard Leo is universally recognized as the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. I have in the book a former employee of Leo's who described his mission as this. He said, Leo figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception. Conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts. And this is the overall point that I'm trying to make in the book, is that the fight to weaponize religious freedom is a blowback against the waning demographic power of the conservative, white, Christian, heteronormative male majority, right? That power has been slowly on the wane, and they are seeking to reclaim and recodify that power by capturing the federal judiciary. So
in practice, what does that mean? You went to law school. If you're in law school and if you happened to have the same passion that you do for church-state separation, but you were hell-bent on the other side of the issue, what would that have meant for you? Like, what would the Federalist Society have done if a young conservative version of Andrew happened to be in law school and pushing on the for the other side of all these issues?
Such a good question. And it would have meant me being dialed in to a network of money and power that would have elevated my career at every single step along the way. They're tapping people really early for important and powerful positions, and then using this network to lift them up through the ranks. So Leo's job was described for judicial nominees here as the monitor of the various nominees' ideological purity, right? So this is a group that was single-minded because Leo was single-minded. And to give you an idea of the influence they've had, Chief Justice John Roberts and Sam Alito were both nominated in 2005. Both are members or were members of Leo's Federalist Society, and Leo played a crucial role in both of their partisan nominations. Clarence Thomas is a longtime friend of Leo's and a member of the Federalist Society, too. All told, Leo is responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, all of whom were members of the Federalist Society. So that's 6 total votes on the Supreme Court when you throw in his friendship with Thomas and his membership in the society. And 6 votes on the Supreme Court, and Leo chose 5 of them for their ideology, right? For a crusader
So he is
ideology.
the Supreme Court.
He is.
He is the court.
He is.
It seems like in a lot of ways he's like an NBA scout, just kind of staking out junior highs to see which of these kids is going to make it, because I could start working with them right now, and by the time they're in college, like, I'm already ready for the draft. I mean, I got them ready to go.
Yeah, and you've got these networks of groups that will give them experience and then shuffle them to another group to give them experience. They'll get judicial clerkships with the conservative judges, and now
building up their resume.
Yeah, and now with 6 of the members of the U.S. Supreme Court, they'll be able to get these clerkships. And if you come out of a Supreme Court clerkship and you take a job with a law firm, one of these white shoe law firms, you're looking at a 6-figure signing bonus just because you've clerked for a Supreme Court justice. So it makes a very big difference, and they've built this network, this financial and power network for decades.
And I feel like this is a softball question for you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why isn't there a liberal version of the same group?
It's a really good question. There are certainly groups that are looking at doing this. The American Constitution Society is a big pushback against the Federalist Society. The group that I currently work for, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, is working on building some direct responses to these. That's building power and long-term influence in a less sinister, more open manner. And I think a big part of the reason is that the law has been on our side, and we have believed and treated the courts as these arbiters of truth and justice. But if you want to understand what is happening right now with religion and law, with our Supreme Court, first of all, you have to read American Crusade, my book, but you also have to unshackle your mind from the belief that the Supreme Court is an impartial arbiter of truth and justice. The Supreme Court depends on people believing that myth, right? And like McConnell and Trump and Leo cheated and stole and packed the courts to put their collaborators in place, right? They didn't do that because they just wanted their people who would administer justice even-handedly. They chose people who would not do just that.
We'll be right back with the interview in just a moment, but first, a shout out to our sponsor. I do a lot of research and writing from public spaces using public Wi-Fi, and sometimes I'm blocked from watching news clips or videos from other countries. Other times, I don't want anyone to know how I'm researching them. Incognito mode just isn't enough sometimes, since internet service providers can still see every single website I've visited. That's why even when I'm at home, I never go online without using ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is an app that reroutes your internet connection through their secure services so your ISP can't see the sites you visit. Most of the time, I don't even know it's there. It just runs in the background. It's compatible with all my devices, and it encrypts my data. So if you think data is your business, use the VPN rated #1 by Business Insider. Visit our exclusive link at expressvpn.com/friendlyatheist to get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/friendlyatheist. We thank them for sponsoring this podcast. You mentioned this in the book. I've heard other legal scholars I respect mention this too. But if we have this idea that the Supreme Court is on the side of civil rights and decency, it's really because of what they did over the span of like a 20-year period in the 50s, 60s with or under Warren. But that's not the norm. Usually, it seems from your book, usually the history of the Supreme Court has been to do the sort of things we see them doing now, which is pushing a certain ideal, a certain mindset that hurts more Americans than it helps, it seems.
That's absolutely right. And it's part of the myth. And I think lawyers are more prone to this. I think we learned this in law school, but I think we're also taught this in the public schools around the country. We're taught to revere the Supreme Court as this body that, defended civil rights and, that decided Brown versus Board of Education, and Gideon versus Wainwright, which is the case that says, you get to have counsel if you're, accused of a crime. And we think of it as this bastion of civil rights. And historically, that is just not true. You look at the history of the Supreme Court, and by and large, it is a deeply conservative and retrogressive body. And I think that's a hard truth for a lot of Americans to realize, especially, I think, paradoxically, a lot of lawyers. I've been talking a lot more about this lately, and I tend to notice that it's the lawyers who are the most opposed to looking at any kind of Supreme Court reform. And I think it's because we have really been drinking that Kool-Aid more than anybody else. That's what we're given in law school.
Is there one, we speak about these 5 or 6 justices, the Federalist Society justices, as almost this core block for against religious freedom as it ought to be applied. Is there one justice whose presence is like ultra-crusade-y, or are they basically 6 bodies and they're all interchangeable?
That's a very hard question, I think. I think John Roberts is a lot more involved in the crusade than people realize, especially given some of his favorable treatment in the media, given his some of his what the media would label wrongly label more liberal votes in certain cases. I do think that Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas are particularly involved in the crusade, and that's because they've been on the court pushing these ideas for 2 decades or more, but have not had the votes. And now they do, and they're really excited about that. They've been chomping at the bit and chafing at the slowness of their ability to enact change, and now they are free from that. And they still write with the bitterness of ideologues who can't force their views on an entire country, but actually have that power now. So that they're problematic. I mean, I certainly think that all of them are. And in the beginning of American Crusade, I explain and I really list the pedigree, and go back and look at some of the things that these people have written. Like we have John Roberts' memos from the time when he was in the White House talking about we have a long fight before us before we can get public prayer back into public schools. And we fight.
Not the words of a moderate.
No, and those are the words of a crusader. Right? That is the language of a crusader. We fight prayer in schools, right? And then you get the case of Kennedy versus Bremerton School District this term, where you have a coach imposing his religion on other people's children, and the Supreme Court rubber stamping that. And, it took Roberts 40 years, but he got there in the end.
I know you read these stories about like Amy Coney Barrett. I've seen a couple of these stories where they shine a light on the religious practices of the faith, the Circle of Friends, that group she was part of. And honestly, I always feel a little weird about those articles every time I read them, because it talks about like the way they treat women, or what an ideal woman in that situation ought to be doing as a homemaker or whatever, very retrograde patriarchal views. But every time I read those articles, I always feel weird because, one, she's still going to be on the court no matter what. And two, her beliefs aren't that weird compared to like the Catholics on the court. We're just used to the Catholic views, I guess. I mean, is there any value to talking about her faith as if it's something weird, or do you find that to be a distraction from something bigger?
I see people's, and first of all, I do touch on this in American Crusade. To me, the distinction is that we have Barrett on the record saying that judges' personal religious views should trump their oath of office. And that is the interplay that the Senate should have been questioning her about when she was nominated for the Seventh Circuit and when she was nominated again for the Supreme Court, right? Because if you are explicitly saying your personal religious beliefs trump your oath of office, then the Senate actually has a duty to examine you about why that might be the case, because then you're talking about abusing your power to impose your personal religion on everybody else, which is exactly, by the way, what is happening. I think the senators did a remarkably inelegant job when it came to that. You have Dianne Feinstein's "the dogma lives loudly within you" comment, which is right, but not a great way to question somebody. And obviously the other side was going to turn around and cry foul there.
So we do have an obligation to explore what her faith is, what she might believe, because she's said herself it may have an impact on how I decide cases.
Exactly, because she made it an issue, right? She is the one who wrote about what a Catholic judge must do when presented with a question of abortion. And we have that in black and white, and then we have her later on, of course, voting in the Dobbs case in the way that her Catholicism dictates, and not the way that the law or our decades of history and precedent dictate. I think those are absolutely relevant questions, and I do get into that. I do think there's a fine line for the senators to walk, because we also have one of the things that makes our Constitution unique and original. We have Article 6, Clause 3, which is no religious tests for public office. But you can talk to somebody about their religion, and especially their religion dictating how they're going to decide cases on the bench when they've stated it, without imposing a religious test.
What impact will Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson have on this court, if not in the short term, then in the long term?
It's a really good question. I think she's going to be writing a lot of dissents. in the short term. Hopefully, writing this given that we don't want her to be in this part of this ultra conservative majority, and I don't expect her to be when it comes to these cases. Her record on religion and the law is relatively thin, but she did give some heartening answers in her confirmation hearing. I think overall the problem that we face with this Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is the problem here, and it requires a solution. And this is something I talk about pretty extensively in American Crusade. We need a fix to the Supreme Court. It has already been packed. It has been packed with crusaders. It has been packed with ideologues they were put on the bench to make these decisions. And if we do not turn around and fix that, we are not going to see any real progressive change in this country for a very long time. And substituting one justice onto the court is not going to fix that.
So let's talk about that. If the title of your book is American Crusade, because the Supreme Court includes all these crusaders, religious crusaders, like, it doesn't sound like the word crusade doesn't have a natural pushback to it. Like, how do you defeat a crusade? What is the way we can actually fight back against the Supreme Court? Because you're right, just trying to replace one of these justices with a lifetime appointment, it's not just a long game. I mean, you can't predict what's going to happen. You can't strategize based around that. So what would be the right fix? Is it term limits? Is it something else? What is it?
It's a really good question. And the first thing I think we need to do is set our expectations here. Because the one thing that I have noticed, even though I feel like I have been screaming about this problem for years, and writing this book for a while, is that people now that Roe versus Wade has fallen and reproductive freedom is a memory, now that the separation of state and church is openly under attack from the high court and religious freedom threatened as a result, now people are saying, okay, well, what do? We need a fix. We need a fix right now. And the first thing everybody needs to understand is there is no quick fix to what has happened. There really isn't. The other side built power and these influential and wealthy systems and networks and structures for decades. And now they are reaping the fruits of that very hard work. And we are not going to turn around and figure out a quick, easy solution to undoing all of that. It's going to take a lot of time and effort on our part. I like to tell people that voting is literally the least you can do in this situation, and it is. So one is set your expectations, because this is a long fight ahead. The biggest thing that we could do to take a chunk out of their victory would be to expand the Supreme Court, to rebalance the court that has been packed, the seats that were stolen.
I've noticed that you don't actually say expand the court very much on social media or anywhere else. You use different terminology.
Well, because a lot of people, the other side likes to paint it as though, we are trying to suggest that packing the court is the solution, but the court has already been packed, right? That already happened. I mean, they stole a seat, they jammed another justice in it at the very end of Trump's term when 50 people had already voted in the election. They put another guy in over credible accusations of sexual assault and no investigation into those, right? They deliberately packed the Supreme Court, right? And like when we talk about changing the size of the Supreme Court and how that's some political taboo, Mitch McConnell changed the size of the Supreme Court when it suited him politically. He knocked it down to 8 for more than a year because it suited him. And then when his party was back in full power, they added that person back onto the court, right? I mean, this happens all the time. And in fact, our system of checks and balances was designed to check one of the three branches when it gets out of control. And the way that the executive, the president, and the legislative Congress check our Supreme Court is by expanding it, changing the number of seats. When the court gets out of control and gets political, I mean, historically, that is what the other branches have done. They have expanded or threatened to expand the Supreme Court to rebalance a court that is radical and out of control, and as this one is, drunk on power.
And what would it take at this point? I mean, is that just a matter of getting rid of the filibuster, getting a 50th vote for getting rid of the filibuster by Democrats in the Senate? Is it more to it than that?
Well, I mean, this is why I tell people that voting is literally the least you can do. I mean, we have to convince, first of all, the people that this is the right thing to do. And, again, there's this hesitation because we view the Supreme Court as, I said, the arbiters of truth and justice, and they are not. Right? Like it said, the words carved on the front of that building are equal justice under law. And that is not what this court is about. This court is about privileging Christians under the law. I mean, that is what this crusade is about. That is what this court has been doing. So I mean, I think we have to have this public conversation and then convince our Congress that this is the right thing to do. And it's not just expanding the court generally, right? It's actually rebalancing the court and undoing all of the damage that was done by Leonard Leone and Mitch McConnell when they packed the court already. So it's not just expanding it.
The rebuttal I sometimes hear from conservatives is, or even Democrats, is sure, we can add 4 seats to the Supreme Court theoretically if we had that power, but Republicans are just going to add more seats when they're back in power.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple responses to that. One, the Republicans, again, already did that, right? That has already happened, right? They already packed the court, right? They didn't add seats. They stole seats to pack the court, to put their people on it. So in the tit for tat situation, the tit has already happened. Are we going to tat or not? Are we going to unilaterally disarm and say, okay, you can do it, we're not going to? And again, the second response is, if you are an institutionalist who cares about the institution, this is the way our system was designed, right? Our system of checks and balances is meant to check an out-of-control branch, and that is what is happening right now. The institutionalist response would be to expand the court. A third response is, okay, so what? If the court is already politicized and political, and under the we don't want to go to this tit-for-tat thing, we're operating as though it is not a political body. And if that makes it clear to the public that it is, fine, I'm okay with that. And the fourth would be, okay, so what? Let's have 51 people on that Supreme Court. Then every one of those votes is diluted. Every one of those people is less powerful. For my entire legal career, for really most of our lifetimes, people have been litigating cases before the Supreme Court by targeting one justice. The swing justice on the court. First it was Sandra Day O'Connor, then it was Kennedy. Now people think it's Roberts. It's really not. Right? And that's crazy.
They gear their arguments toward just what that one person wants to hear.
Exactly. And it's crazy.
What they think.
And right now, it's even we know exactly how every one of these cases is going to come out now. Right? There's no guesswork involved. I mean, you can, if you want to make money, bet on Christians winning, right? I mean, it's so very clear what's happening. So to me, fine, dilute their power. I don't care. I don't care if there's no reason to have just 9 on the Supreme Court. There's no reason that we shouldn't dilute their power up and make it harder to guess which way they're going to come out on any given case. So I don't find any of those objections worthwhile. I get it, but I think they all are rooted in the myth that the court is apolitical and is an arbiter of truth and justice, and it is just simply neither of those things.
In your first book, The Founding Myth, you spent all this time talking about the threat of Christian nationalism, and 2 things I've seen happen. I will totally give you 100% of the credit for this. One is that I see Congress politicians actively describing that threat, people like Jared Huffman. They are pointing out the damage Christian nationalism can do. I've seen Alex Wagner talk about it on her show, politicians talking about it on the House floor. That's important. They're calling this out for what it is. But the other side of that is I've also seen some Republicans embrace that term as like, hell yeah, I'm a Christian nationalist. We would be better off that way. I'm kind of curious if why you think conservatives are now embracing this, why they see this as a good strategy, and like, what does that tell you about your book? Like, did you achieve whatever goal you wanted with that to bring it to people's consciousness, or is this like the monkey's paw curling in? Like, yes, now everyone knows what it is, and now what?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been fascinating to watch the country wake up to the threat that Christian nationalism poses to our democracy. I remember right when the founding myth came out, I was at the Religion News Writers Association conference in Las Vegas. And I said to a room of probably like 250 religion reporters, I said that Christian nationalism is an existential threat to a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And something along the lines of, I think it's the biggest threat to our country right now. And, this is a room full of reporters who focus on this issue. I was on a panel with Jack Jenkins and Catherine Stewart. You'd think.
So you would think they would embrace everything you're saying because they are the ones on the front lines. They write about this stuff.
Yeah. And I remember just the looks of skepticism. And I was actually, Jack Jenkins was actually, and I were chatting on Twitter about this a while back, and he was like, "Yep, you can see my skeptical eyebrow raised as you said that, Andrew," something along those lines. But it is. So in one respect, it's really rewarding to see the country wake up to this threat that I've been talking about for so long. And to answer the second part of that question, am I surprised that they're adopting this label?
They're wearing it as a badge of honor. Proudly, you're damn right. I'm a Christian nationalist.
Yeah. I'm not. It's a pretty common conservative tactic to try to adopt the name, right? Like, think of deplorables, right? Like this is common for them to do. But in this case, I don't think they realize that it's not going to play quite as well as they think. The phrase Christian nationalism is inherently alarming to a lot of the country. And I went over some of the data for this in the original book, The Founding Myth. So, I think that's gonna backfire against them. And, this all ties into the new book too, American Crusade, because, why are we seeing this crusade as something that I struggled to really communicate to the reader in an accessible way. And this is happening largely as a backlash against equality realized. Right? Christianity was once able to discriminate on the basis of race, and now that is largely unthinkable. Christianity was once able to legally subjugate half the population. Christianity was once able to legally discriminate against LGBTQ people, but now isn't in most places. And as more people realize the rights due to them by virtue of being human, the sphere of religious imposition is shrinking. And the crusade seeks to reclaim this lost ground, right? And you can see this, like let me give you three just quick examples. Obamacare, right? This expanded equality by recognizing the reproductive rights of Americans. And Hobby Lobby's conservative white Christian owners fought against that expansion of rights under the guise of religious freedom. The Obergefell.
We don't want to pay for contraception, birth control, abortion care for our employees, and because we're a Christian company, we should have the right to reject all that.
Yep, and the Supreme Court okayed that. I've got a whole chapter about why that is absolute garbage. And it's actually, a good chunk of it's based on an article I wrote for you right in the wake of that decision back in 2014. Then the Obergefell decision, right? Expanded equality by recognizing the rights of LGBTQ citizens to equal marriage. And then you have Masterpiece Cake Shops, conservative white Christian owner, and then this host of other businesses fighting that expansion by claiming religious freedom. And then you can go back even farther. Go back to Brown versus Board of Education. One of the good decisions out of the Supreme Court, at the kind of marking the beginning of the era of that progressive court, the Warren Court, that actually gave the Supreme Court this reputation that the ultra-conservative bloc is now abusing. Right? It expanded equality by recognizing the rights of Black Americans to equal access to public education. And in the name of religious freedom, Christians pushed for school choice and vouchers and segregation academies, right? So conservative white Christian Americans facing equality are just continually acting like martyrs suffering for their faith. They feel these expansions of rights violate their rights. But parity is not oppression. And that all comes back to the crusade. That is why they are trying to weaponize religious freedom, to get back to that point in time. And that is why so many of these same people are turning to Christian nationalism as well. It's all the same swirl and same feedback loop.
If the goal of the founding myth was to make people aware of Christian nationalism and the threat it posed, what to you is the goal of American Crusade? What do you hope readers take away from it? And especially, I mean, it's one thing if they're just not paying attention to the Supreme Court for whatever reason, but even for people who have seen what the court has done, who are alarmed by the overturning of Roe, what are you hoping they take away from your book?
I want people to understand what is happening with religion and the law with our Supreme Court right now. I do think American Crusade is like nothing people have ever read, because it's not a law book. It's exposing an attempt to warp our law. It shows that these Supreme Court justices are eager and ready to take these cases. They want to hear these cases, right? The Supreme Court typically gets to reject like 99% of the cases that come its way, but it decides so many of the religious freedom cases that come its way in favor of conservative Christians. And the simple fact is that this Supreme Court wants to decide these cases. And this is all, I mean, they advertised this a decade ago when they called for this crusade. And the crusaders, the groups that are out there who are doing the work to tear down the separation of church and state, right? Who are the opposite of the Americans United and the American Atheist and the American Humanist Association, right? Who are doing that crusading work, are teeing these cases up for the Supreme Court. So, I tell the reader what happened in each of those cases, not only because I actually lived many of those cases and I followed them closely. I mean, this has been my whole career. I litigated some of these cases. I briefed others. I've been on the front lines defending our country from this assault. So I know what happened each step of the way. And I think I'm one of the only people who has sat through so much of this and seen how radical the change has been from the front lines, that I wanted to share that with everybody in terms that they could understand, right? This is not a book that's written for lawyers. It's written for anybody to pick up and realize, oh, whoa, I cannot believe this is happening right now.
I don't have the title in front of me, but I know you are also writing or co-writing a book for lawyers about church-state separation. What is the focus of that book? Because it's written for experts in this field. What are you telling them?
So that's written for burgeoning experts in the field. This is a textbook that is written for law students. So it's Religion and the Law, and I'm co-editing this with Professor Leslie Griffin, who's a brilliant professor. It's called Religion and the Law. It's the fifth edition. It just released. I would not, unless you are a law student or if you're a law professor, I would encourage you to assign it to your students. But otherwise, it really is, it's a text for academics, for students to prepare for these cases.
Is there anything specific in that particular book you're trying to really get across to those burgeoning lawyers, though, that maybe might be over the heads of the lay reader?
Yes. I mean, one of the things I really am trying to do is to get them to start questioning some of the things we've even been talking about on this podcast. So the way a law book works, a law textbook works, is you write a little intro to a chapter and the chapter kind of hits a specific subject matter. And then you have the cases, the opinions that the courts have written. And they're usually edited down to focus on the specific points you're trying to address. And then you have all these discussion questions at the end where you really try to get the students thinking about all the different ways this particular opinion that they just read applies to other cases, and get them to question things that have been written in it. And I had a lot of fun writing those discussion questions. It was a whole lot of fun. I think
pointing out inaccuracies in the opinions.
Yeah, I did. I'm not gonna lie, I did. Yeah, but this is the thing that I really thought was interesting when I was writing American Crusade, is that religious freedom questions are not hard. But they're like these legal questions of religious freedom. They're not always simple. And sometimes they can be complicated, but really more often they're just emotionally fraught, especially if they involve children. But in the push to weaponize religious freedom during this crusade, the Crusaders have misled and confounded so much of the country about where we draw the lines for this founding American principle of religious freedom. And the thing that I try to make clear very early on, and it's the framework that I use for the rest of the book to describe these cases, is that while religious freedom cases may not raise simple questions, they really aren't that hard. They really, really aren't. And I mean, basically, you can answer almost all the hard questions in these cases by drawing three pretty simple lines.
Well, the book that is for most readers is called American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. If it's anything like the founding myth, I have no doubt people are really going to enjoy it. And the book is out when?
The 27th of September. Please go pre-order. And if anybody wants a signed copy, if you go to bit.ly/signedac, SIGNEDAC, you can get a signed copy from my favorite local bookstore, Room of One's Own.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. Keep up the good work, and I can't wait to hear the feedback on the new book.
Thank you, my friend. Have a good one.